While I was on vacation and study leave, I had occasion to visit many churches. Maybe that's an occupational hazard to take vacation and study the time to go visit churches. But in reverse chronological order, I worshiped at Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco, and I will tell you why I did that in a sermon. I think it's the 23rd of September. How's that for a teaser? I prayed twice a day at the Abbey on the island of Iona during the week that I spent there. I got to tour the Glasgow Cathedral, medieval cathedral, one of the few medieval cathedrals in Great Britain that survived the Reformation intact. It's now a Church of Scotland congregation. They're Presbyterian. They don't have bishops, so they don't have cathedrals. They still call it Glasgow Cathedral. I worshipped at an evening worship service at St. George's Tron Church in Glasgow. I have no idea what a Tron is. I looked it up and I forgot. But it's his Tron. That's why there's a church there. I toured the Chester Cathedral. There's all kinds of interesting theology in the architecture here in this renovation of the choir and the choir screen that got put in. I got to sing in the Bath Abbey with the Goldgate Men's Chorus. We were on tour in Great Britain. And had it not been under construction, because it's becoming the Leaning Abbey of Bath, so they're working on shoring it up, it would have been more fun because we would have had more choices of where to be standing acoustically in the space. But it was fun to be there. We also rehearsed in St. Michael's Without in Bath. You might be wondering, without what? It's without the medieval walls of the city. There's a St. Michael's Within in Bath as well. This is St. Michael's Without. And you can see this medieval church, they have taken out the pews and put in chairs and made it a contemporary space and still an ancient building. They've done a remarkable job with it. I was taken, among other things, by the door handle on the glass door to get into the sanctuary. I don't know how well you can see that here in this light, but there are it's a bronze of people wandering into the church and looking around. I sang at the Christ Church Cathedral in Oxford University. That was actually the musical highlight for me, was singing in that space. I worshipped at the Evensong service at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And in the morning, I worshipped at St. Bartholomew the Great, not to be confused with St. Bartholomew the Less in London. The music at St. Bartholomew the Great was impressive. They have a professional quartet who sang a contemporary setting of the ancient liturgy for the Mass. The sermon, on the other hand, was dreadful. The scripture was the gospel reading we heard today, and the Anglican priests did this riff on sandwiches in a British retail company called Marks and Spencer. Despite their auspicious name, you cannot go wrong when you have Spencer in your business name. Marks, and despite the fact they have a wide variety of things they sell, apparently what they are particularly known for in Great Britain is their packaged sandwiches. Marks and Spencer sandwiches. Then he went on and on about sandwiches in his sermon. At this point, I hope someone in the congregation is wondering, what the heck do sandwiches have to do with the scripture reading? And there is a connection. It is more literary than theological. The storytelling device that Mark uses has a formal name that I can never remember, but its informal name is a sandwich. Mark, the sandwich in literary, as a literary device, the storyteller starts a story, interrupts it with another story, and then concludes the first story. So you get the bread of the first story and the filling in the middle. So the story of Jairus' daughter is the bread of the sandwich, and the story of the healing of the woman who with the hemorrhage is the meat, the filling of the sandwich, the peanut butter and jelly. It's helpful to understand how a sandwich works in literary devices. Understanding the importance of Marks & Spencer packaged sandwiches, not quite so important. Literary sandwiches typically have common themes, and they sort of hold those stories together. And then there are differences as well that often point to the storyteller's, what the storyteller is trying to get at. Typically, the middle story, the meat of the sandwich, is the more important story to the storyteller. So I was listening to the scripture being read in worship at St. Bart's the Great, as it gets called, and I recognized the sandwich. And the reading, as it comes to its conclusion, Mark makes this comment. It's almost a throwaway line. It's parenthetical. In fact, the New Revised Standard Version puts this comment in parentheses. He mentions that the girl was 12 years old. I'm listening to the story and I think, hang on. Wasn't the woman hemorrhaging for 12 years? And so I take out my iPhone and open up my Bible app. I'm wondering what the people around me were thinking. But I opened up my Bible app and I plugged in Mark 5 and scrolled through. Sure enough, 12 years. That parenthetical remark of the girl being 12 years old, that can't just be a toothpick in the sandwich trying to hold the two stories together. Mark's got to be doing something with that. So I started wondering what that might be. 12 years. That is why I'm preaching on this scripture today. I've been wondering for a month what's going on with those 12 years. So let's take a closer look at the text. Start by noticing that Jesus was not opposed by all Jewish leaders. Jairus is a leader of the synagogue, and he came and sought out Jesus for his daughter. He, in fact, begs Jesus. He falls at Jesus' feet and begs him to come and heal his daughter. Jesus agrees, but the trip to Jairus' house is interrupted. An unnamed woman approaches Jesus secretly. Notice that contrast. A named male leader, an unnamed woman secretly approaching Jesus, and touches Jesus' clothes. So why did she approach secretly? We got to guess. Mark doesn't tell us. But the two big candidates for the reason why is that she's female. And so for her to be speaking to someone who is not kin in public would be inappropriate. The other possibility is her medical condition. She has been hemorrhaging for 12 years. Now, Mark doesn't tell us where the hemorrhage is, what the hemorrhage is caused by. But the primary candidate for that is probably a uterine issue. And, if she had had a wound that wouldn't heal and was bleeding all the time, I don't know how you stealthily sneak up on Jesus if that's what's going on. But so she probably has a uterine issue that is causing her to essentially have a nonstop period. And if you have when you're on your period, you're ritually unclean, and so you need to sort of separate yourself from the community to some extent. And so she would have been perpetually separated from community. So that would be another reason for her to be secret about it. She needed to approach him. We know that this unnamed woman, what we do know is that she has this medical condition that is making her suffer, and that she once had money, but she spent it on doctors, and they did nothing to make her life better. So at this point, we assume that she is poor. She may have had male relations at one point, but they don't seem to be around now. There is no one present to lift up her case, no man to lift up her case the way the girl, Jairus' daughter, has her dad to lift up her case. And if she has any male relations, they seem to have abandoned her at this point. We don't know what spurred her boldness or her belief that if she touched Jesus' cloak that she would be healed. We do know that she's bold, though. We see this woman act boldly to take care of herself. She carries out her plan. She approaches Jesus. She touches his clothing. And just as the woman understood the changes in her body, Jesus felt a change in his body. He felt power go out of him. Notice that Jesus plays no active role in this woman's healing. She comes up, touches him, and is healed. Jesus knows that something has happened. He doesn't know what has happened, and he wants to know what has happened. And so he said, "Who touched me?" And his disciples say, "Yeah, right," in this big crowd. Again, the woman comes forward, only this time it's not boldness that drives her forward, it's fear. She tells the whole truth. Now, she could have snuck away with her healing, but she comes back and testifies to what happened. And rather than be angry at her for stealing his power, Jesus commends her and calls her daughter. He makes himself Jairus in relationship to her. He becomes a man to plead on her behalf. She becomes kin and part of humanity again. Your faith has made you well, daughter. Go in peace. The story returns to the journey to Jairus' house. People traditionally interpret the healing of the woman who is hemorrhaging as an interruption that delays Jesus' trip to Jairus' house, and that delay leads to the girl's death. That's actually not in Mark's gospel. In John's gospel, when Lazarus is dying, Jesus is delayed and he gets blamed for not getting there on time for Lazarus. But in Mark's gospel, it doesn't say that. All we know for sure in Mark's gospel is that Jesus was on the way to the house, and sometime between when Jairus left his home to go seek out Jesus and that moment, the daughter dies. There's no need to bother the teacher anymore. Jesus challenges Jairus to hold on to his faith. Only believe, he says to him. Hold on to your faith, the faith that made him seek out Jesus in the first place. They get to Jairus' house. Jesus goes to where the girl is laying, and he takes her by the hand and tells her to get up, and she gets up. And Jesus says to the parents, "Give her a Marks and Spencer sandwich. Give her something to eat. I guess dying makes you hungry." As the Anglican priest clattered on about sandwiches, I kept thinking about the 12 years. It's not just some unnamed illness that caused this 12-year-old girl to face death. In some sense, all girls die sometime around the age 12. The girl part of them does. Puberty comes, menstruation begins, fertility begins, and in her culture, this girl at age 12 would have been eligible for marriage. The girl is dying and the woman is being born. I thought too about the woman who had suffered from nonstop bleeding for 12 years, presumably vaginal bleeding, and that made me think about conditions that cause that and what modern treatments for those conditions would be. And generally it's hormone therapy or a hysterectomy, which make a woman unfertile. And when Jesus stopped her bleeding, she became unfertile. There are pagan traditions that look at womanhood and divide it into 3 stages: maiden, mother, and crone. Now, crones get a bad rep now, thank you fairy tales, but crones are actually an honored position. They're the ones who carry the wisdom of the community. The matriarchal system, yeah. So, in Mark's reading here, I see Jesus embracing and celebrating and empowering the transition that is needed, the transformation that is needed to move from one life stage of womanhood to another. And there's more healing going on in this story than just the healing that the girl and the woman experience. We think of the girl as the one who has the illness that leads to her death. We think of the woman as having the illness that caused her to suffer for 12 years, that made her poor, that pushed her to the margins of society. Jesus doesn't heal just them. Jesus heals the culture that they're in. There's something that happens in almost all, perhaps all of the healing stories in the Gospels. That's that the community of the people who are healed are changed as well as the people themselves. D.D. Rusher notes that Jesus' healings took place primarily outside synagogues, outside in the streets, in the deserts, and it's not a surprise. There were practical reasons rooted in social divisions. Priestly codes made many of those with illnesses, leprosy, bleeding, deformed parts of the body, lameness, blindness, made them social outcasts. If Jesus was a healer, his ministry would necessarily focus on the most marginal and powerless members of the social order. His healing challenged the assumptions of a society that drew lines around who was in and who was out. It redefined community and social class. This attention to societal and communal wholeness is a challenge to conservative healing theologies that pay no attention to the social placement and that do nothing to challenge the marginalization in our communities. We need to hear what's happening not just to the people who were ill, but to the society that was ill as well. Jairus' family and his community are transformed from grief to joy. And when the family is told to give the girl something to eat, we're all reminded that we must nourish those around us in body and soul. When the woman is healed, the woman who reached out to Jesus is healed, and he calls her daughter. Not only is she brought back into community, but the community is challenged to see her as kin. 12 years is a long time to wait for wholeness. May we work so that people who are suffering, including people who are suffering in this room, find wholeness more quickly than that. Amen.